Engineering projects. Can you imagine being part of one of the world's largest engineering projects? Imagine if two guys were working on engineering projects, both of them huge projects. One was a success, one was a failure. You would want to know why. Why did the one succeed? Why did the other one fail? From a business standpoint, maybe you'd like to be a banker, a lawyer, an accountant, a financier. You'd wonder the same thing. Two giant engineering projects. One succeeds, one fails. What happened? How did it go right? How did it go wrong? Let's take a look.
So, starting in the early 1860s, there was a concerted effort to connect the entire country by railroad, east to west. This started actually during the Civil War, which was a huge undertaking. The nation was obviously very busy with the war, but certain people in Congress, certain business leaders decided this was an important project. In the long run, they were right. So we began building, started here, moving this way, started here, moving that way. The two will meet in the middle. The first connection from coast to coast is going to be in the year 1869, so 4 years after the Civil War ends. We got a couple lessons we can learn from this. First of all, before the connection, before the East and the West were united by railroads, we had isolation. People lived in communities where there was not a lot of contact with the rest of the country. And what happened is communities developed very unique, very peculiar views, very peculiar ways of doing things. There was not a national culture because everybody was sort of isolated. Along with that was the development of telegraph, right, which also communicated back and forth. This was going on about the same time the spread of the telegraph and the spread of the railroad. So one of the problems we faced was isolation, communities not being a part of the larger national conversation on any issues. We also faced problems with economics. When you don't have good transportation, you might have corn, you might have wheat, you might have iron, copper, silver, gold that you're getting out of the ground, but you need to get it back to Chicago, you need to get it back to St. Louis, you need to get it up to Minneapolis. And without railroads, that was pretty difficult to do. So they started building the railroads. There's a lesson in the railroad building. The first few attempts were pretty poor because they were orchestrated and funded by the government. And when the government does something, quality usually suffers. So the first line that was connected in 1869 had a number of problems. The quality of tracks was so poor that after they were put in place, sometimes a year or two later they had to be ripped up and redone because it was done with low quality. Why is that? Well, the government just sort of hands money over to people and says, go build a railroad. The government doesn't watch to see is there quality. Whereas if you or I pay for something, we watch carefully to make sure we get good quality. So the quality of the tracks was poor. Further, the government paid by the mile. They said, we'll pay you so much money per mile to connect the East and the West. What that did was it gave the railroads an incentive to build a track that was not a straight line. Straight line is the shortest distance between 2 points, but if you're getting paid by the mile, you're going to make a zigzag so you get more money. Problem with that, of course, is that it takes you a lot longer to get from one place to another. So the first few attempts to build a cross-country railroad, while they did succeed, while they did make a railroad that went from east to west, the quality was low, the distance was way too long because of the zigzags that were built into it, and finally the government paid way too much for it. The government got overcharged, which is usually the case when the government buys something, it pays too much.
James J. Hill not only organized the Great Northern Railroad, which is an amazing feat of engineering and technology, but in the process he developed new forms of business management and economic insights. He did a couple things that was different than all the other attempts at building a transcontinental railroad. He saw that when the government gives subsidies, which is just handing money to companies to build the railroad, when the government grants large pieces of land to those companies, or when the government gives a loan guarantee, which means the company can borrow money but not necessarily pay it back. All of those things created problems which made the other railroads into failures. Now, you think that would help a business to get money from the government, but it actually hurts a business. Uh, Bad management. If a company is not well managed, then the government can give it all kinds of money. It's not going to fix the problem. However, if the government does give a company a lot of money, it actually encourages bad management because the managers will figure if they mess up, the government will keep handing them more money. So whenever governments give money to private businesses, it creates problems. It creates problems by creating perverse incentives. If the government is giving you money to do something, then you can build things that don't even need to be built. And there are all kinds of examples of railroad lines that, instead of going in a straight line from point A to point B, wandered around and covered lots of territory for no good reason. Part of that was because the government paid by the mile, and so a straight line would be the worst deal. A meandering line would get further miles and therefore more money from the government. The government also paid railroad companies to build through the mountains by giving them more dollars per mile when they built in the mountains than when they built on the flatland. So the railroads, many of them ran through mountainous territories where no railroad was needed. James J. Hill refused to take any form of help from the government. No subsidies, no loan guarantees, no land grants. And because of this, his engineers, his mechanics built their system carefully and with quality, because you want to build a good product if you're not taking government money. If you're taking government money, you can build crappy products. And Hill invested more money up front. He used higher quality of steel. He hired better engineers and technicians. He asked his workers to build a better foundation underneath the railroad tracks, all of which made it long-term profitable when other railroads went bankrupt.
Good news. We're going to get somebody who's going to come in and fix this. Couple of people, a group of investors led mainly by a man named Hill. His last name was Hill, and he is going to build another route, a northern route, and the northern route is going to have no government financing. He's not going to accept any money from the government, not going to have any dealings with the government. It's just going to be several companies working together to build it. What happened? They built it quicker, they built it for a lower price, they built it with higher quality, and when it was done, it didn't have those extra zigzags trying to soak up the miles. So the northern route turned out to be more reliable and more financially successful. Interestingly enough, way back then, all the way back to the 1800s, right? This is 1869 was the first connection. These northern routes get built in the 1880s and 1890s. We were already doing a lot of trade with China. And these routes opened up trade with China. From places like Portland and Seattle, ships could cross the Pacific. So we were importing and exporting with China because of these routes up here. And because they were done without any government help, right? When the government helps you, it actually hurts you. Don't accept government help because the government will mess you up. They were done without government help. They were more successful, more reliable, more profitable, worked out pretty well. So by the year 1900, by the turn of the century, we have a nation united by railroads. Telegraphs went along with that, and shortly thereafter, we're going to get long-distance telephone as well. What is it going to do? It's going to help create a national culture because people are now able to buy the same products. Everyone is buying from a big company in Chicago known as Sears and Roebuck, and Sears and Roebuck, based in Chicago, is going to use that network of railroads to transfer its goods across the country. So we're united by common consumer goods, news. People can travel. You can go visit other cities, see what they're like. You can visit friends, family, or you can just go be a tourist and look around. But the railroads and the telegraph are going to unite the country more and create more of a feeling of being unified, being on the same page. So the development of railroads was a big, big deal. The farming, the wheat, corn, soybeans that gets grown in here is going to feed the whole nation from east to west. The cattle, the cows, the beef coming out of here is going to be transported far and wide. So it's a big boost to the infrastructure of food. Nutritional infrastructure is going to help the country. So giant era of railroad building and change the nation a lot.
So we have a story of two railroads, two giant projects to build a railroad across the entire United States. 2,000, 3,000 miles from one coast to the other, from the Atlantic to the Pacific. Two projects, each of them trying to do the same thing. One of them is a disaster. It loses money, it's not profitable, large sections of the railroad have to be torn apart and rebuilt when it could have been done right in the first place, so it was a mess. The second project, doing the same thing, building the same railroad only a few miles to the north, parallel track from one coast to the other. It's a success. It does quite well. It's profitable. No problems there. What was the difference? What are the lessons we can learn? If you're engaging in a big project, a business project, an engineering project, beware government intervention. Don't take subsidies. Don't let the government help you, because when the government tries to help, it will mess you up. So the difference between these two projects boils down to don't let businesses and government get involved with each other. Keep them separate. That's all for now. Goodbye.